If you're running vMix 27 or higher, then you have access to inbuilt Zoom features that allow you to host or join a Zoom meeting within vMix itself. Then add individual participants as inputs in your production, like these guys right here. You can then stream and record the results. You can also set up active speaker switching.
Just like this.
Hi, I'm Heath from vMix, and I'll be walking you through all of the Zoom features that are available in vMix. There are quite a few, and as this video progresses, they'll get more advanced. So if you just want some quick tips to get started, then check out our Zoom introductory video linked in the description. You can also jump ahead in the timeline if there's a specific topic that you want to learn more about. I'll start by explaining that if you're running our free 60-day vMix trial, or you've got vMix Max, Pro, or 4K, then you'll have access to the full suite of features, including unlimited participants totaling 30 megabits per second. I'll explain this a little bit more later. If you have vMix HD, you'll be able to add a single vMix Zoom input to bring in one participant at a time. And if you have a basic edition, then you'll need to upgrade to a higher edition of vMix to access this feature. Here I've got a basic production setup, including my camera with embedded audio, a title, and an image that I'll use later. To connect to a Zoom meeting, I'll start by clicking on the Add Input button, and then going to Zoom. From here, I need to follow this link so that I can download the Zoom plugin. I'll download it and run the installation. Once installed, I can return to vMix. Go back to Add Input, go to Zoom, and now we're ready to go. Here I can click on OK to add my first Zoom input. Now I've got a new Zoom input and I'm being instructed to click on it to connect it, so I'll click here. At the top, I'm invited to log in to my Zoom account. Note, to join an existing Zoom meeting hosted by someone else, I don't actually have to log in and I can attend as a guest. But if I do this, I may not be sending or have access to the best video quality available for each participant's video. I'll share a bit more about this later. So I will definitely log in. From here, I'm presented with a browser and I'll enter my email address and password of my Zoom account and click Sign In. I'm now presented with a request for vMix to operate with Zoom, and this will require vMix to have some access to your Zoom account settings. I'll click on Allow to do this. And that's it. We can now close down this browser and return to vMix. Okay, now that I'm logged in, I have the option to host a meeting. But before I do, I'll quickly show you the unique features of the Join option. Here, I can either enter the Zoom meeting ID and password of a meeting set up by a host, or I can copy the invite link from elsewhere and then click on the paste button here to add the details automatically. All right, now let's look at the host a meeting option. I'll click on the host a meeting button. Then I can see all of my meetings that I already have scheduled in my Zoom account. If I want to add a new meeting, I can simply click on this link. Here I need to enter my details once more. And now I just click on Schedule a Meeting. From here I can add the details of the meeting. I'm going to leave the rest of the settings as is and click on Save. While we're in the Zoom account settings, there are a few things you'll want to consider. Firstly, the vMix Zoom plugin needs permission from participants to capture and potentially stream or record the content. This permission can sometimes conflict with other Zoom settings like automatic cloud recording and local recording. So if you or any of your Zoom participants have any Zoom recording features turned on, try turning these off. There is another thing that you can try, and I'll explain it a little bit more in a minute. Secondly, if you have a paid Zoom account, you may have access to higher resolutions for each Zoom participant. Make sure you have HD video quality enabled in your Zoom settings, and encourage your participants to do the same before attending the meeting. Thirdly, If you've turned on a Zoom setting to automatically mute all participants when they join, this may need to be disabled for audio to flow properly. Alright, with our settings reviewed and our meeting scheduled, we'll return to vMix and click the refresh button. This refreshes the drop-down list so that I can select the most current meeting. That automatically populates the meeting ID and password, and now I just need to enter my name. My name will be used in the Zoom chat, so our participants in the meeting will see this name. Next, I'll nominate whether I plan on streaming or recording the vMix production. This is required so that Zoom can request permission from participants in the meeting. Pick the most appropriate option for you. For me, as I'm currently recording, I'll be selecting recording. As I mentioned earlier, this permission can sometimes conflict with other Zoom account settings, such as automatic cloud recording. If you have issues, try turning these settings off in your Zoom account, or try switching between the recording and streaming options here. Now for the maximum resolution. As I hinted earlier, your Zoom account might offer you higher resolutions for your Zoom participants. My Zoom account has access to 1080p, so I will select that. I put a link in the description that helps explain the resolutions that you might have access to. Remember that every participant will need to have enabled HD mode on their device's Zoom app, and certain devices have different resolution limits. Also, Zoom limits the total bandwidth of the connection to 30 megabits per second. So if I try to add too many participants to Zoom, then some participants may have their resolutions dynamically reduced to fit within this threshold. In addition, the maximum resolution of each participant will be dependent on the speed and the reliability of each participant's internet connection, and Zoom may reduce resolution to maintain a stable connection. Now, for the video and audio return feed, I can choose the default options, or I can set a dedicated video output and/or audio bus, which all of the Zoom participants will hear and see. Note that it is not possible to send different video or audio to different participants in the meeting, as vMix is only able to connect to the meeting once. I'm going to leave these as the default, and just note that vMix automatically performs a mix minus on the audio that goes back to the Zoom participants. So even if I have all of my Zoom participants going to the master output for streaming and recording, their audio won't be sent back to them. This avoids any feedback echoes. That being said, if echoes are heard in the meeting, then try wearing headphones for best results, as your speakers might be sending audio back to your microphone, and Zoom might not be able to adequately cancel out the feedback. So now I'll just click on Connect, and I'll wait for the connection to establish. There we go. I'm now connected to the meeting. There's no one in it just yet, so I'll right click and go to Open Zoom Manager. Now here on the left, I've got some details about the meeting. I've got a link that I can share with guests, and I've got the meeting ID and password. Oh, and look, now I've got Tim, who's just joined the meeting. I can see a notification here on the left, and he's turned up in the participant list on the right. So if I right click on him, I've got some options. I can add him as a new input, or I can add him to an existing input. He's already in there. That's indicated by his red dot. I've now got Ben here, so I'm going to right click on him, and I'm going to add him as a new input. So that's allowed him to have a red dot, and his details have turned up in the top right. So at this point, we've got two guests. One of them is coming in at 1920 by 1080 at about 30 frames per second, and the other one's doing a similar thing, maybe just a slightly lower frame rate. Now, I'm just going to show you that I can enter a chat message and they'll all receive that in their Zoom session. So I'll just send them a quick message here. I'll say, "Hi, gents. Thanks for coming." With that message sent, I'll close down the Zoom Manager. Here I have my Zoom inputs, and each participant by default has their audio set to be automatically mixed by vMix. We have a video that explains automatic audio mixing in more detail that I've linked in the description, but what it means is that unless a Zoom input is in the vMix output up here in the corner, or as a layer in another input that's in the output, that input will remain muted, indicated by the audio bars being blue rather than green. If I want a Zoom input to be heard at all times, I can go to the settings of the Zoom input, and under General, I can untick the automatically mix audio. I can then close this, and I can manually turn the audio on for this input. Alright, from here, I'll right-click a Zoom input to show you some of the other features that we have access to. Firstly, we have the disconnect option. This will end the Zoom meeting if you're a host and will leave the meeting if you've joined a meeting. If you click this, you'll be prompted to confirm, so don't be worried about accidentally clicking it. Next, we have the participant source. Default will simply add the first participant to have joined the meeting. Here we can quickly select a different participant from the Zoom meeting list. Note that all participants must have unique names. If there are two of the same name, only the first will be accessible. We can also select none, which is helpful if you want to have a blank input at the ready for when a particular participant turns up. Next, we have the participant source type. Here we can toggle between the participant's video or content share, or we can set it to auto and it will automatically toggle for you. When the participant is sharing, a small blue sharing banner will appear on the Zoom input. This is particularly helpful if you're managing the source type manually, as it will inform you when the sharing has begun and you can switch to it. Depending on the Zoom app used by a participant, it can be possible to have two Zoom inputs in vMix and dedicate one to the participant's video and the other to their content share so that you can present both together at the same time. vMix will bring in high-resolution shared content from its Zoom participants, such as 4K screen shares. But remember that Zoom ultimately controls the resolution you receive. The next item is the max participant resolution. This is the same setting as the one when initially creating the Zoom input, but it can be different for each input so that you can prioritize which inputs are most likely to have higher resolutions by reducing others. Remember though that Zoom may dynamically change these depending on a number of factors, and your Zoom account will need to support the resolution you're seeking. The next option is the audio source. Here you can choose the participant's audio only by selecting isolated. Alternatively, you can choose the mixed audio, which is the full meeting audio, excluding yourself, of course. Helpful if you want all guests heard, but don't want to add them all into vMix as Zoom inputs. You can also select the audio from the currently shared source in the meeting if a participant is sharing content with sound. The last item in the list is an overall meeting setting. This allows you to send original sound quality into the Zoom meeting from vMix, minimizing Zoom's noise and echo filtering and allowing stereo audio throughput. Oh, and just another thing, if someone raises their hand in a Zoom meeting, it will appear as a message on their input window. Now that we've gone through all of the main Zoom settings, let me show you how to bring the Zoom chat into a vMix production. There are two ways to do this actually. The first is via the vMix social app. I'll add a social title by going to Add Input, and then going to Titles, going up to GT Social, and I'll scroll right to the bottom, and I'll select this one here, and click OK. I could create my own social title in the GT Title Designer, but I'd suggest watching our dedicated video that goes through how to do that if it's something that you want to learn more about. All right, I'll close this down and I'll pop the title up into the preview so that you can see it. The next thing to do is to open up the social app. So we go down to the hamburger menu down in the bottom right-hand corner and then select vMix Social. All right, here we've got a handful of settings, but the key ones that we're going to look at today are the title that we want to use. And in this instance, we want to use our new social title. So I'm going to click that. There are other settings. You can check out our vMix social training video to learn more about those. All I need to do is go up to Zoom and click on to demonstrate this to you. So we'll go to on And before I minimize this application, I'm going to pay attention to the web interface URL, and I'm going to enter that into another device that's connected to my network. So I've paid attention to that, and I'm minimizing this. I've got my device here. I've entered in that IP address and port number, which was that URL that you saw before, and now it is coming through. So there we go. vMix Social is now up and running, and you can see the first comment, which was the one that I wrote earlier in the training video. Hi gents, thanks for coming. So I have the ability to simply tap on this and send it straight in to my title. So there we go. That has sent the comment straight into my title, as you can see up in the preview there. We've got the message, we've got the name of the commenter, and a few other details. Very good. All right, that's the first way that you can bring comments from your Zoom chat into your titles. The second way is via data sources. So to do that, we're going to go down to the hamburger menu, and we're going to click on Data Sources Manager. From here, we click on the plus icon and we add the Zoom chat data source. So I'll click here. From here, I will click OK. And here we've got our first comment listed right there. Now, if I minimize this, I'm going to add another comment so that I can show you what happens. So I'll right click on an input, open up Zoom Manager, and I think I'll just write second message, just so that it's easy to find. I'll hit enter. And that's now gone into the Zoom chat. I'll minimize this, open up the data sources, and now we have a second message. There it is right there. Okay, next step is to bind the information in this data source to a title. So I'm going to minimize, go back to our original social title, go to the title editor, and for the from name, I'm going to bind it to the name column. So I'm going to go to data source, select my Zoom chat as the data source, pick the column to be the username, and leave it as selected. I'll explain why in a moment. I'll click OK. And now I'm going to go to the message, and from here return to data source, set the Zoom chat once more. And now for column, I'm going to leave this as auto. Now the reason I can do this is because the field I'm filling out is called message, and in the data source, it's also called message. All right, and by selecting selected, I'll be able to pick the row and it will populate the data here. So I'll click OK. I'm going to close this down. I'm going to open up the data source, and now when I select the second item, it will update the title for me. So there we go, second message. And if I want to return to the original comment, I can click on that. And that's how easy it is to add a data source. Now, admittedly, I didn't complete filling out all of the elements of the title. So the logo and the avatar didn't get updated. And so you do need to make sure that you would do that for yours. But for the demonstration purposes here, I've just filled out those two. All right. The last thing to do is bring everything together into a nice layout and add some dynamic switching to focus on the active speaker in the meeting. I've set up a layered input already by resizing and cropping a few layers. I'll show you what I mean, but if you want to know all about the layer design tools in vMix 27 and onwards, I'd recommend watching the dedicated video about this. So I'll click on the settings for this input and I'll go down to the layers section. Now, I've already got a template set up here, as mentioned before, that has a large window plus two small windows, and on the right is where I'm going to put my social title. So all I need to do is apply the inputs. So for the first one, I'll put myself in. For that second one, I might put in Tim. And for the third, I'll put in the other Zoom input, which is Ben. And finally, for that fourth input, I'm going to put in the social title. So there we go. We've now got a nice layout. I'll close that down, click on it to put it in preview so that you can see it. Okay, we've made it up to the last step, and that is to give some dynamic switching to our input so that we're putting the active Zoom speaker up in the large box and keeping the people that are not talking in the smaller boxes below. To do that, we're going to be using triggers. If you're not familiar with triggers in vMix, I'd recommend that you check out one of our triggers training videos, and that's going to show you how they work from the ground up. To do this in Zoom, we need to go to the settings of the Zoom input and then go to triggers. From here, looking at the list of triggers, we've got on Zoom active speaker. So I'll click on that. Next is the function that we're going to use when that occurs. So I'll go to all and I'll search through all of the functions for a function called set layer animated. This is going to animate putting the layer into the position that we want to go to. So the next thing is to apply this to a particular input. For us, this is the layout input. And then as we go along, we can set a delay if we wish, but I'm going to leave that as is. And finally, we can set the index, input, and duration in milliseconds as is shown below. So the way that we do that is we enter a number followed by a comma, then another number, a comma, and another number. We don't put in any spaces. And so the first thing is the index. The index is the number of the layer that we wish for our input to go to. And in our case, it's 1. The second item is the input number that we want to move into that layer position. And for us, that is input 5. And finally is the duration, the time that it will take for the input to move to that position. That's in milliseconds, so I'm going to go with half a second or 500 milliseconds. And now we click on add. Okay, we've got our first trigger set up. I'll close that down. Next, we're going to go to our second Zoom input. Go to the settings, back to triggers, and this time, instead of typing the whole trigger out in its entirety, I'm going to copy a trigger from elsewhere. So I'll go to copy from. I'm going to select the previous Zoom input, and I'm going to make sure that triggers is ticked and nothing else is ticked. I'll click OK, and this brings in a copy of that trigger. Now it's not perfect as is, so I'm going to firstly click here, and I'm going to change the input so that rather than referencing input 5, we're going to be referencing input 6. And I'm going to click on edit to edit that. And there we go. It's now applied to that input. And now we're up to the final trigger, and that's for my input. I can't actually add a Zoom trigger to a non-Zoom input. Instead, the trigger must be added to a Zoom input, but applied to a different input. Let me go into the settings and show you. So if I go to the settings of this Zoom input and return to triggers, here I'm going to go and select on Zoom active speaker self. So by selecting that, I can leave this set layer animated as is. For the input, I can leave this as layout. And then finally, the last item is the input that it applies to. And I'm going to apply this to my camera input, which is input 2. All right, and I'm going to click add. So I've now got 2 triggers on this Zoom input, but one of them is applied to my camera. Okay, closing this down, I'll now quickly unmute my participants. And now I can have a chat to you guys. So Ben, how's your day been going?
Good, thank you.
That's good to hear. And Tim, what's your afternoon looking like? Any plans?
Well, I might treat myself to a Slurpee this afternoon. Thank you, Heath.
Nice. All right, well, that's the end of this training video. You guys have now seen how all of this works. If you have any more questions, we have a lot of help documentation about all of the Zoom integration in vMix, so make sure you check that out on our website at vmix.com. If you still have questions after that, you can email us from there as well. So with all of that said, Thank you very much for joining me on this enormous training video about Zoom. We will see you on the next one.